Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and this is the ZMF that I've wanted to hear for a long time. So this is the ZMF Auteur Classic. And I mentioned recently that ZMF has been a brand that's kind of been a bit of a mystery to me. Like I've observed them and admired them from afar, like admiring their build quality, looking at frequency response graphs, and kind of thinking about which ZMF would be the one that I'm most interested in hearing. And this is it. The Auteur, I guess maybe I should say more specifically, it was the original Auteur. This is the new Auteur Classic, which is like a mildly refreshed version of the Auteur, but this is basically the headphone we're talking about, people. And the reason I figured this would be the ZMF that was for me was just looking again at the frequency response graphs. It looked the closest to my beloved Sennheiser HD600 plus bass that I've been looking for, that kind of everybody's been looking for. And well, for the past couple of months, I've had the Auteur Classic on hand, been listening to it, comparing it with some other headphones, and I'm ready to let you know what I think. Does this live up to what I hoped for it? We're going to talk about that. But I guess before we get into that, a quick shout out to Zach from ZMF for sending in this headphone for review. If you want to check out the Auteur Classic, I've got them linked in the description down below. But with that out of the way, we're going to dive to the table, talk about what you get inside the box, physical form factor on this headphone, fit and comfort. We'll talk about that stuff as well. And then we'll dive into talking about the sound, starting with the frequency response graph, a little bit of a preview of what you can change with pad swapping. And then I'll get into actually a comparison with another very similarly priced headphone. I guess on that note, I haven't talked about the price yet on this guy. And prepare yourself, because it's a ZMF, it's an expensive headphone. $1,500. It's a dynamic driver headphone, and we'll get into talking about the build quality in a little bit, but let's start with what you get inside the box. And I wanted to pull up this guy, actually. This is the carry case that you get with the ZMF Auteur Classic. It is quite a beefy carry case. I don't even think this will fit onto my desktop, but here you go. Right? It pops open with these big chonky latches, and then you've got a nice padded interior there for storing your pricey $1,500 headphones, which I guess you'd want. But also, apart from that, you get just kind of the headphone and the cable. So let's talk about that a little bit. Now this cable, again, like I've talked about in all the ZMF reviews I've been doing, I'm not actually certain that this is the stock cable. It looks a little bit different from what I see in pictures, but it also seems like it's mostly the same. Just like a nylon braided cloth cable that is, in some pictures, all black. In this case, it's black with these little gold banding on it. Either way, I think it's a pretty decent cable. It's a little bit on the stiff side, a little bit memory prone, as you might see, but I actually think it works pretty well with this headphone, because the headphone is kind of heavyweight. It's on the heavyweight side, and this cable just is kind of a nice match for it. Like, I don't know, it's not like a sleek commercial build. It's got kind of this hand-built bespokeness to it, and I feel like the cable kind of reflects that as well, and I like that. Now, one thing to note, you see down here, this thing is terminating in 4.4 mil. When you order this from ZMF's website, you actually get the choice of what kind of connection you want. Do you want 3.5, 6.3, 4.4, or even balanced XLR? And I think that's pretty cool that they give you all those options. Apart from that, I guess I'll comment that the length on this is actually a little bit on the short side. It's about a 4-foot long cable, which for me is actually perfect, because I'm more of a portable listener. I'll walk around the house with a digital audio player like this, and I don't want a really long cable for that usage. But if you're planning to use this headphone on a desktop setup where you need a longer cable, my desktop setup actually works well with these shorter cables, but if you need a longer cable, you're gonna have to find something else. ZMF has a bunch of options they'll sell you, but also this does use a fairly standard mini XLR connection that goes into the headphone itself. I'll highlight that briefly. So you can find alternatives out there, although it's not quite as common as something like a dual 3.5 millimeter entry. But generally, a pretty nice cable. I'm happy with this cable. I like the aesthetic of it and the comfort. So we'll put that to the side and bring in the headphone itself and talk about this guy. So a lot in common with the build on this headphone versus the other ZMFs I've reviewed, as well as, frankly, just every ZMF headphone. Like, they've all got kind of the same construction in terms of headband design. They're all made out of real wood. Yes, this is real wood, so every headphone's going to look kind of unique, and that's part of what makes these headphones pretty attractive to me, is just like this again, this term I used before, it's like this pride of ownership, right? It's like you get this thing that's hand built, it's unique, it's yours, and it's got kind of like this quality to it that, you know, this is something like I want to hang on to for life. I want to pass this on to my kids and their kids. Like, it's got an heirloom quality to it, which is something you can't really say for a lot of other more plastic built headphones, or even just something that is maybe made of metal, but it's just got more of a commercial generic look to it. So I like that. I will say I'm not a big fan of these little grill patterns on here. Like, it just seems a little old, I guess. And then the wood, I would say here on the Auteur Classic, is a nice looking wood, but it's also kind of one of their more boring looking woods. Like, I do like this little feature that I got here in this copy. But yeah, I would say that some of their other woods are a little bit more exciting. Now, from what I understand, you can order these in different woods. I don't know, if I looked on their website, like, there's no wood option, but they do periodically make these available in different woods, and you see them all over the place. So there is some customization that can be done there, but you're gonna have to be a little bit more in tune with the ZMF community and when those drops are available and stuff than I am. But nonetheless, that is just to say, I think the wood is on the more boring side versus what other ZMF headphones have. But what I do like actually a lot is the lightness of the wood in contrast with the darkness of the headband and these little dark accents. Like, it's just got a really nice, clean, but also still hand-built aesthetic to it that I like a lot. I think this is a very handsome headphone. The headband is, again, the same construction that we saw before, where you've got a padded leather kind of outer band here, and you can see that there are these little paddings in here, but then underneath of that, you've got a leather strap, which is kind of an arrangement you usually see is like a suspension strap, where this leather strap will kind of like distribute the weight across your head so you don't get a hot spot. I feel like because it goes up against the outer headband, you kind of lose the suspension capabilities of it, but nonetheless, I find this to be a very comfortable headphone, so I'm not necessarily a complaint, just kind of an oddity. I think mostly it just kind of, it gives this just a very plush build and plush aesthetic to it. Anything else I wanted to talk about the build quality before I dive a little bit deeper into the sound? The comfort? I don't think so. So yeah, let's just go ahead and talk about the comfort with this thing on my head. I will highlight quickly what the opening in the ear pad looks like. Plenty of room for my ears. It's not like the most spacious ear cup, but I have no complaints about how much space there is laterally, top to bottom, or even depth. Like, these are pretty nice plushy ear pads. The one complaint I will have of kind of the fitment of this headphone is an issue I had also with the Bokeh closed, which is that the tilt on the ear cup seems not quite enough, right? You'll notice as I tilt the ear cup, right around here, it starts to clash with the yoke. Now I can kind of like force it through and get a little bit more extra tilt out of, a little more tilt range out of the ear cup, but you can see it's starting to pull the pad off, and frankly, I don't think that that's the way it's meant to be used. I don't think that's like the intentional mechanical design. I wish that these ear cups just would fall through those yokes a little bit more, because when I put this thing on my head, and I guess now is a good time to do that, I get a little bit more pressure up top than I do down below. Like, it doesn't fit quite square against my head. It's not as bad as it was in the Bokeh closed, but I feel like it could be a little bit better if there was just a little bit more extra tilt range on those cups. But otherwise, I think that this is a pretty comfortable, plushy place to be as far as headphones go. Again, like I mentioned, there's plenty of room for my ear, so I can push it, all the way forward. That's with my ear touching the back of the cup. That's with my ear touching the front of the cup. So you can kind of get a sense for how much range there is. I don't have any issues with my ears touching the drivers or anything like that. And now, one thing I will say is that, like other ZMF headphones, the weight on this is not especially light. It's around 490 grams. So it's under 500 grams. It's at a weight I don't care. Like, I don't mind the weight on this headphone at all. But if you are sensitive to a weighty headphone, just note that this is going to weigh about twice as much as like a Sony Bluetooth XM5 headphone. All right, just to kind of put this in a context with something you might know. Or if you're more familiar with like a Sennheiser HD 600 headphone, those are like under 300 grams. So yeah, this guy's, it's a bit of a weighty boy, but it's also not by any stretch of the imagination the most heavy headphone out there. And generally, I don't know, I find this to be a pretty comfortable headphone to wear. Fit stability is good. It's nice and secure. It doesn't want to be falling off my head. And the clamp is not super aggressive, but it's also, you know, again, enough clamp that it's holding its place on my head, and that much I appreciate. Anything else I need to talk about the physical form factor? I don't think so. So we're going to dive into talking about the sound here on the Auteur Classic. And hold on, I'm stalling while I pull up the frequency response. So this is the squig. If you want to check this out, this is how the Auteur Classic measures on my rig. If you want to compare it with other headphones that are measured on my rig, I've got squig link linked in the description down below, but we're going to go ahead and do a little bit of analysis here and kind of highlight, well, actually, let me pull this up real quick. So what you're looking at is the Auteur Classic versus kind of like a neutral diffuse field tilted target, right? And if that doesn't mean anything to you, don't worry about it. But I'll pull up this real quickly, this other dotted line, which is my measurement of a Sennheiser HD600. And I mentioned that part of why I was interested in the Auteur Classic above other Sennheiser headphones was the fact that the frequency response kind of aligned up pretty well with the HD600, but with more bass. And as we see here on my measurement rig, I'm seeing very similar things to what I saw on other measurement rigs. So there you go. Here's one thing I'll say. There is actually more bass here than I expected. But otherwise, and maybe, you know, there's like a dip here, whether that particular feature, I don't know what that sounds like. I guess I could try to fill that in with EQ, but I didn't get that particular with my EQ testing. Just to say that generally, you know, this is a good sounding headphone, but it does end up sounding a little bit different than what I expected. I expected it to be more of a mid-range focused sound like the Sennheiser HD600, but in listening experience, it actually ends up sounding a little bit more contrasty. So we'll talk about that. And I'm guessing that's partly because we got, you know, a pretty significant bass boost, but I'm also hearing it just a little bit more brighter than I see it in the graph. Perhaps that's entirely explained by this peak here at around, what are we talking, like 5.5K? Maybe, I don't know, but I'll just say that it does, to my ear, sound a little bit brighter than this measures. And maybe another headphone just to pull up briefly to kind of highlight this, there's the ZMF Atrium. And these measurements are kind of similar, right? There's a lot of similarities between these. This is one that I hear a lot warmer than it graphs. And I guess maybe you could explain that here with, you know, this dip in the treble, but this one to me sounds significantly warmer than something like the Auteur Classic, which is what we're talking about here. So that's kind of, you know, the brief on the frequency response. But yeah, let's just overall, it ends up being a little bit less mid-range focused than anticipated, a little bit more V, a little contrasty. And still there is some fullness in the lower mid-range because of where that bass boost is. Okay, more to kind of my subjective listening impressions though. Not that any of that wasn't my subjective, but more into the less tangible things. What I really like about this headphone is there is a nice just kind of punchiness and viscerality to it that I like a lot. It's kind of got this, like, for lack of a better word, a nice sense of dynamics to it. Like it sounds punchy. It sounds kind of physical and visceral in a very satisfying way. It's got well-defined transients, but the treble is still very well controlled. It doesn't have any issues with it being overly bright. I mentioned, like, tonally, it kind of has a little bit more brightness to it than I expected, but it's not in like a piercing, sharp way. It's just a nicely well-controlled treble experience, which I like. And overall, it's just kind of, again, a dynamic, lively sound that's comfortable to listen to. Maybe not quite the mid-range focused sound signature I thought it was going to be, but overall, I really do enjoy listening to this headphone. So let me bring in one other headphone for comparison, and it's not going to be the HD600 because, well, that's a $300 headphone versus $1,500. But this is the Audeze MM-500, also an open back. This one's a planar. And price on this one is $1,800 bucks. So a little bit more expensive than the Auteur here, but I think if you're shopping for this one, you should probably also be considering a headphone in this price range. And now right off the bat, there's going to be some pretty big physical differences between these two, right? This has got kind of this, again, bespoke, hand-built, heirloom quality to it. Whereas the Audeze has got more of a commercial industrial look to it that might be a little bit colder, but also maybe a little bit more finished and polished. So depending on which aesthetic you're going for, you might prefer one over the other. Overall, I think I think I still do lean toward the Audeze. I like this all metal build. Yeah, this is a very lovely headphone. I brought it on the table for a reason. But when it comes to sound, here's where they're pretty different. I would say that the Audeze ends up coming across more mid-range focus, like I mentioned, kind of expecting the Auteur to come across. This sounds just, it's more mid-range focus, less contrasty, but it also still has like a more visceral, impactful bass, which is interesting. You know, this has a good sense of contrast and that good sense of dynamics, but when I listen to the MM-500, it really does kind of go to, in my opinion, the next level in terms of that, again, that viscerality and that physicalness with the bass. Additionally, I think that the stereo imaging here on the MM-500 is next level. Whereas the stereo imaging on here is fine. The Auteur Classic does a decent job with stereo imaging. It's not a specifically or especially wide stereo imaging where you hear the MM-500, it really does just kind of like blow out the head stage when I'm listening to it. So I really like it. Now, interestingly, I would say that the MM-500 is actually a little bit less incisive and a little bit less clear of separation between sounds, right? So if you have multiple instruments playing at the same time, I feel like they're a little bit clearer in terms of, again, that delineation between sounds than they are in the MM-500. And yet, nonetheless, the sense of stereo width comes across wider to me on the MM-500, which is, again, interesting. The one thing, kind of caveat that I will throw in there is that I do think the bass is significantly more articulate here on the MM-500. I mentioned that it's got like kind of the next level physicality, but I'm specifically listening to like sub bass, and I'm thinking of a track, Intrude by Parcels. It's just got this, this really deep bass line, and it's a lot easier to follow the shifts in pitch and the shifts in volume here on the MM-500, whereas on the Audeze, they can come across a little bit on the blurred side, even though this can come across overall bassier. This one to me is just like the more articulate, faster bass, for lack of a better word. So yeah, in terms of my preference, I'm still going to go with the MM-500, but that's not to say that there's not something to love here about the ZMF. I guess that will lead us into my conclusion here on the Auteur Classic. Again, not quite the mid-range tuning I was going for, but if I were going to be buying a ZMF headphone for myself, the Auteur Classic would definitely be it. I love, again, that hand-builtness to it, the fact that this looks like something that you want to hand down and pass down in your family, and it feels like something that'll last a long time for sure. The sound is very nice on it. It's got, again, that punchiness to it, so I dig it. Out of 5 stars, I'm going to give the Auteur Classic a very solid 4 stars. And if you want to check it out, I've got it linked in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you haven't already, please do hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, and follow the link to my Discord server where you can join the discussion, connect with a bunch of other audiophiles talking about headphones, IMs, source gear. We don't talk a lot about source gear, but you can talk about it if you want. But yeah, join me there, and I'll catch you on the next super review. Cheers.
This review is super, yeah, yeah, yeah. This review is super, yeah, Join with the force of reviews. We now have the tools to brave the misleading world of audio fools. Hey, this review is super, and so are you. Grab your headphones, sniff a graph, and share your thoughts in this pursuit. Let's begin with the theory.